The Biden administration EPA has finalized a new rule which will essentially force manufacturers to stop selling internal combustion engine cars nationwide. This is what they've done. They've finalized a new tailpipe emissions rule, which sounds like it's about air pollution, but it's not about air pollution. It's about forcing the manufacturers to meet a tougher and tougher standard, which can't be met except with electric cars, because electric cars don't have tailpipe emissions. So in order to hit this average, every auto manufacturer selling cars in the United States will have to have a fleet average that requires them to stop selling internal combustion engine cars. So it looks like by 2032, I think is the date, that only about 30% of the cars that are sold in America could be internal combustion engines. The rest would have to be some form of battery or plug-in hybrid or something like that. Well, the trouble that they're going to have with this is that it's going to make cars very much more expensive. It takes away consumer choice. There are all kinds of issues with electric vehicles. And this runs afoul of the Supreme Court's decision in 2022 in West Virginia versus EPA. And this Supreme Court decision said that an agency cannot interpret a piece of the law that Congress didn't intend to do what they're going to do with it, essentially. They can't decide a major question of public policy by taking one little piece of the law out of context and giving themselves the power to completely change national policy. They can't do that. In the West Virginia versus EPA case, that was about the Clean Power Plan that had been formulated during the Obama administration. This was a rule that was going to require the shutdown of coal-fired electricity plants in the United States, which would have an enormous financial impact on everybody in the United States, and they were twisting some piece of some rule to say they had the power to do this. And the Supreme Court said, no, if Congress had wanted you to do that, they would have said so. They would not have hidden it in some clause in one sentence in a law that's not even about that. So this is what we're dealing with. The EPA has formulated a new final rule that will force an end to internal combustion engines gradually. It's almost certain to be thrown out in court, but once again, people have to go sue over it and wait for the Supreme Court to get to it, and meanwhile, it's very expensive. The biggest problem that people are having who are advocating electric vehicles and this transition to electric vehicles is that the consumers are rejecting them. Consumers are saying no for many reasons. One of them is that the charging infrastructure turns out to be a lot less reliable than people thought. So they pull up to these chargers. They're not always working. They're not always working fast. Sometimes it's a trickle instead of a fast charge. And who maintains them? Who's responsible for them? Well, we've put billions of dollars of taxpayer money into building out this infrastructure, and it's not happening. It's not happening fast enough. So people are finding range anxiety to be a factor in buying electric cars. And in 2023, for the first time since, I think, 2012, sales actually declined in California of electric vehicles. So that was not expected. This is becoming obvious that there are issues with electric vehicles. There are fires with lithium batteries that are environmentally destructive, and then you have all of the component parts that go into electric vehicles that have their own environmental hazards, both in the disposal side and in the manufacturing side. So it's not a pure environmental good to say everyone should change over to electric cars. There are a lot of problems with it, and the Biden administration doesn't care. They're trying to force this through, just as Governor Newsom tried to force it through. Governor Newsom, during the pandemic, issued an emergency executive order saying that we were going to change over to electric vehicles. I believe 2035 is the date that no one would be allowed to sell an internal combustion engine vehicle in the state of California. And he did that during the COVID pandemic, totally unrelated to the COVID pandemic, under those emergency powers. And that's where we are in California. We have regulations now that are trying to step toward selling fewer and fewer internal combustion engine cars. Well, there's a consumer backlash to this. Even the car manufacturers are dialing back their investments in electric vehicles. Ford has dialed back by, I think, $12 billion. They were going to build a a factory in Kentucky. They were going to build a battery plant, and they've put everything on pause there. And General Motors and Mercedes have also cut back on their EV spending. And so it's the market telling the government this isn't working. And what's the government's response? We'll force you. We'll force you by having a regulation that says manufacturers have to meet this tailpipe emission standard, which they cannot meet except with electric vehicles. And they're going to try to force that through. I believe the Supreme Court will set them straight on that, but it would be better if the American people were aware that this is how it's being done, that manufacturers are being forced to take decisions that are not good for their business, that they know are not good for their business, but they have to do it for regulatory reasons, and that is raising the price of cars. I mean, after all, if you sell cars and the government makes you sell cars that don't sell, the price of those cars, the money that you're losing on those cars, is in the price of the cars you will sell. So you're going to pay more for vehicles. And that is a burden on the American consumer. It's a burden on households to have to pay more for vehicles, to have to pay more for everything because of government regulations like this. In California, we now have a mandate for clean trucks. We have a clean truck rule that has been promulgated, I believe, by the California Air Resources Board. And they want to say by a date certain, all of these light-duty trucks, medium-duty trucks, have to be electric. So this affects, in cities, all the trucks that municipal vehicles have. Garbage trucks, it affects street repair vehicles, and all the trucks that a city fleet would have will have to be electric. Well, who's going to pay for that? The taxpayer. And then who's going to pay for the charging infrastructure, which does not exist yet, for all of these trucks to be charging? Well, the California Public Utilities Commission volunteered that the ratepayers will cover the cost of the utility side upgrades for charging infrastructure. So the taxpayers will pay for the vehicles, and the ratepayers will pay for the charging infrastructure, and they're the same people getting the bill for both of those. And why are we doing this? What's the point? Does it really save the planet for California to have electric trucks? All of California is only 1% of global greenhouse gases. So when you get the bill for your higher electricity rates, and we pay much higher electricity rates in California than anywhere else, I think we're double the national average the last I looked for electricity rates. When you're paying that, and you're paying those high taxes, and there's not enough money to fix the roads because they're spending money subsidizing electric vehicles because people can't afford to buy electric vehicles, so the government is subsidizing it. Who's paying for all of that? You're paying for all of that. You're paying for it in your electric bill, you're paying for it in your tax bill, you're paying for it in the loss of essential services because money's being diverted to this pointless green agenda, which isn't about air pollution. It's really just about climate change and carbon dioxide and eliminating greenhouse gases. That's not worth what we're paying for it. It doesn't accomplish anything. And it's made the cost of living in California much higher than neighboring states. You can see it. You can see the experiment happening right in front of you. You can go to another state. You can see lower gasoline prices, lower electricity rates, lower prices in the grocery store. This is why. It's these policies which are pointless and don't accomplish anything. And now President Joe Biden wants to take it national and start this same thing, mandating electric vehicles, mandating higher costs for cars is what that amounts to. And why? When you ask a politician, and I have, does California's energy policy, its greenhouse gas reduction policy, have any effect on the global climate? Even if we meet all the targets by all the dates, does it have any effect on the global climate? And this is the answer every time. No, but California must show leadership, world leadership. California must lead. Nobody's following. Nobody wants our higher electricity rates. Nobody wants our higher cost of living. Nobody wants to pay more for food in the grocery store because diesel fuel is more expensive and everything moved by truck is more expensive. Nobody wants that. So why are we doing it? Because our politicians like to have their picture taken, and that's pretty much it. They want to be able to say, we're the model for the world. But actually, California is suffering. We have the slowest job growth right now of any state in the union, because jobs are leaving. You know, if you're manufacturing, you use electricity, it's much more expensive in California than anywhere else. So these are policies that are hurting the people of California, and it's just preening politicians who are doing this to us for their own egos. And they're selling people on the idea that the earth is going to catch on fire from global warming, but actually that's not the case. And you're paying a lot of money, you're throwing your money at the sky to stop climate change, and that's ultimately not going to turn out well.
If you haven't checked out CaliforniaInsider.com, we highly recommend you do that now, because we're going to have a lot of news and videos there. And on top of what we have there right now, we are building a really big platform to cover what's happening in California, so you can be informed. We're going to have more shows, more videos from all aspects of life in California. Go to CaliforniaInsider.com and we'll see you there.